Hello there, my name is Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. Many of my ideas start on a piece of paper, just like this one. I was trying to think up a way to use some scrap strips to add to my fabric bolt. I thought this little pattern might make an interesting divider between some rows of scrap fabric. I know there's a saying about planning, and my plan changed. I just did a video where I organized some scraps, and this is the pile of strips that I ended up with. I started fiddling around with these strips to see how long they should be to fit into this little idea I had sketched out on a piece of paper. I determined pretty quickly that I thought 6 inches was going to be a very nice length for this pattern that I was trying to make. So the next thing I had to do was cut all these strips into 6-inch lengths, and I did cut the entire pile. Here you can see what I was left with these stacks of fabric that are cut into various widths, but they're all approximately 6 inches in length. And I just had a small handful of scraps to put in my scrap bin that were not 6 inches long. My next step was to decide, did I want to do all one color together or did I want to mix it up? Well, I decided on light and dark, and keep your eye on that bright yellow fabric because when this switches to black and white, it's interesting that that one in particular reads light. I mean, it almost looks white when you switch to black and white. So I laid all my fabrics out and I sorted them by lights and darks. Now it's time to start stitching what I had sketched out on my paper. Now the first stitch is a little weird because we're only stitching a partial seam here. But once we get that one done, the rest are going to fall right into place. I started with 2 dark fabrics, so I'm going to take the next fabric as a light fabric, stitch that alongside. I'm going to press that seam open with my fingers, then I'm going to lay the other light fabric for this set and stitch that as well. And in this V shape, I'm going to keep adding 2 darks, then 2 lights, then 2 darks, then 2 lights, and I'm just going to keep going until I feel like I've got enough. The pile I'm drawing from, I have it sorted, the darks, kind of into blacks on the left, greens on the middle, and reds and oranges and yellows in the middle, and then blues on the right. I did kind of the same thing with the lights. I sorted them into colorways. So I'm going to try and mix it up. 2 from 2 different colors with 2 lights from 2 different colors, and then on the next row, try and pick a blue if I picked a green before. Now here you'll see that beginning part of this row, I had to roll it up and put a couple of clips in it. So as I added every couple of rows, I kept turning that roll over and clipping it back. Now these fabrics are scraps. I don't want to spend a lot of time trimming, a lot of time making everything even. Here you can see what I do with a light and a dark. I make sure that light overlaps the dark on the other side, and when I fold that over, you will not see that dark fabric underneath. You will only see the white. And I'm finger pressing everything the same way. I'm not worried about these seams showing through. Remember, these are scraps. They would have gotten thrown away, they're getting reused, they're going to make something beautiful. So I don't stress too much about having everything just so or just measured correctly. It's all going to work out in the end. I decided this roll was long enough when that roll got too heavy to move around easily. So I stopped this first roll, and I am going to go ahead and measure and see how long it is. And I did not trim this video. I wanted you to see how truly long this roll turned out to be. It's actually about 119 or 20 inches long. I'm not vouching for the accuracy of my measurement, but it's approximately 119 inches long. Pretty exciting that, that we've got this nice long piece of fabric here. Well, I thought I would count how many pairs were in this roll as well. I counted 20. That is way off. Later I recounted, and there are actually 60 pairs in that roll. I'm really all about saving myself time, and this may seem like a time-consuming exercise, but this saved me time. Sorting these fabrics out by color and shuffling them like I would a deck of cards, just shuffling them up, mixing them up. All the darks are shuffled, all the lights are shuffled, and then I've got my stack of lights and my stack of darks ready to go, ready to draw from without having to think too much about it. With that all sorted out, I started on my second roll. Well, I came up with an even better idea. After I finished the second roll, I started counting out 2 darks, 2 lights, 2 darks, 2 lights, and I made a stack of the number of pairs I needed to finish a roll. So I spent some time just stacking up pairs. With those pairs counted out, I started my third roll. The very first stitch I had to rip out and redo. As you can see, that did not work out. Here's the correct way to stitch that. Oh, I forgot to tell you that first count of how many pairs in that first roll was wrong. I actually needed 60 pairs for that length of roll. And here we are at the very end of roll number 3. I got those last pieces attached. What a great feeling that is. And then I simply rolled up the roll and clipped it in place, and I set it aside with the first 2 rolls. About this time is when I decided I was not going to combine these V-shaped rows with my scrap bolt. I was going to make a standalone project with these V-shaped rows. So I got started laying out more strip sets, and I was counting them, so I had enough to make 60 pairs to make it a similar length to the other 3 rolls. And I thought you might enjoy seeing this video a little bit in black and white, so you can see how these dark and these light pairs look together. That's a really nice trick to try with your camera sometime if you've got that feature on your phone. It's really nice to see the contrast, and that's important. Even though the colors might look similar, they could be completely different as far as lights and darks. I hope if you try this idea, you'll do it your way. I can picture maybe each side of the V being a color family, like maybe yellows paired up with greens, or blues paired up with oranges. It could be any way you want it to be, or do maybe 4 rows of one shade and 4 rows of the next shade. That could be interesting. There's so many things you could do. I thought I would unroll one of these so you could kind of see the whole thing. Well, I have 4 of these rolls, and each one is long enough to make 2 quilt rows. Here you see I've got them laid out, and I'm thinking, well, I'll just use some white 2.5-inch fabric between them. And here it is in black and white, and I think that is going to be very pretty. So that's what I decided. I had some leftover Kona Snow 2.5-inch strips. I didn't have a full jelly roll, but I thought I probably had enough to do this project. So I'm going to join all these strips together with this diagonal stitch, 45 degrees angle, stitching 2 of these together. Then I kind of flip the tail end around and add my next piece. So what I'm going to end up with is one long strip. Now when I get to the very end of all these strips, what I'm going to be doing is cutting off that excess triangle on the other side of this stitch line. Then I'm going to be taking that entire strip to my iron, pressing all those seams flat, and of course making sure they're all going the same way. And here is my roll of this fabric. All these strips are now stitched together. My next step was to lay my scrappy strip down on my flat surface, and I'm being gentle with it. I'm not twisting it, I'm not bunching it, I'm not pulling on it. I want it to be nice and flat, but not stretched. Then I'm simply laying my 2.5-inch strip right sides together on top and pinning about every 5 to 6 inches. Now, one thing I did, because I wanted these V's to go opposite directions, on one strip, actually I have a total of 4 strips, so on 2 of them I pinned with the V's pointing down with that strip on the right, and then the other 2 strips I pinned on the opposite side. Now at this point in time, I am only pinning that sashing strip on one side of my scrap strip. And my little 2.5-inch strip roll is a lot smaller, and I'm just hoping I have enough to do the other 3 sides of this quilt. Well, I had these all stacked up and pinned, and I just placed them on the floor under my feet and started stitching. I'm stitching a pretty generous seam here. It's a little bit more than 3/8 of an inch on this seam. I just thought a bigger seam here is what I wanted to go with, just to catch all the empty spaces here. Now, in spite of how careful I was to make sure this seam caught everything, I still had a couple of places that I had identified where there was a little bit of gap, and all I did was create a little patch, and I stitched a patch right over the little hole that was showing, and I just thought this would be a cute little feature. Now, I could have ripped out that seam or maybe just even restitched it a little closer to cover that little tiny hole, but that's a lot of fabric when you're talking about 120 inches long and you take away another 1/4 of an inch or so. Well, that's a lot of fabric, so I didn't want to take away another 1/4 of an inch on this strip. Plus I wanted them all to be even, so all I did was this little patch, just a little simple piece of fabric, folded down on all 4 sides, and then top stitched over the hole. Now, what I did to trim these scrap strips, first I trimmed off the excess on the right side of my stitch line. Once that was finished, I flipped the strip around, and then I trimmed on the right hand side 6 inches from the stitch line. With my 4 strips all trimmed up, it's time to pin them together. Now, since I sewed the sashing on opposite sides, these should fit together where I've got V's going up on one row and down on the next row. Once I've got 2 strips stitched together, I'm going to join those 2 strips with the other 2 strips, and I will have all 4 strips joined together. When that was done and I finger pressed it, I went ahead and pinned the sashing to that last outside edge on the side of the quilt. After that, I trimmed up the top and bottom of the quilt and added sashing to the top and the bottom as well. Everything you see in this video took a total of about 12 hours. And what we have after that 12 hours is a really pretty quilt top. It's so scrappy and so cute. I just love it. I think there's kind of an optical illusion going here because the arrows going, the V's going in a different way make it look like the rows are skinnier at one end than the other. They are not. It just is an illusion that looks like that. So that's kind of cool. Well, I had a lot of fun making this quilt. I also did a little bit of binge watching. It's pretty easy to sew these strips together. So not a lot of thought involved, and that's one of my favorite kinds of projects. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you back again real soon.